All right. Welcome to the 2 p.m. afternoon session. Before we begin, we just want to say thank you to the MinneAnalytics conference for allowing us to speak today. Thank you to you guys for showing up to the 2 p.m. session after a long day of presentations. And then most of all, thanks to the speaker in conference room B who unfortunately had to cancel. Otherwise, this session would probably be about half empty. So thank you for him for forcing you guys to show up to our presentation. Before we get started, I'm going to introduce Brandon Wishnow, who is, just to be really clear, he's co-presenting and I am presenting. I want to make sure that that's really clear, specifically for Brandon.
Keep expectations as low as possible for me, is what Steve's saying.
By the end of the presentation, you'll know that he's the real presenter here. Brandon leads our measurement business at Ovative Group, which he'll walk through some of what that is. Brandon loves long walks on the beach. He's madly in love with his new puppy and his wife. And I just found out at lunch that at any given moment, Brandon is halfway through a fiction novel geared towards the tween girls market. Welcome, Brandon Wishnow.
Steve Baxter, ladies and gentlemen. Steve runs our media team, also known as the marketing services team at Ovative Group, which is a team that offers full suite of digital marketing agency services, as well as obviously works very closely with my team to help us build measurement capabilities that actually can deliver value for marketing optimization. Steve, actually, interestingly enough, loves mayonnaise. Come on, a little bit, I know. Wow. As well as hovering around on his hoverboard throughout the office, so some interest there.
All right, over the next 45 minutes or so here, you'll realize we do really serious work, but we don't take ourselves too seriously, and we like to have a little bit of fun, and it's an afternoon session, so we'll try to keep it a little bit light. The tentacles of customer data run deep within silos of every organization. At Ovative Group, we like to wrangle the octopus, as we say, to bring all those pieces of customer data together to get them into a place where they're actually usable to drive value for the organization. Specifically at Ovative, we have a big business that activates that data on the media side, but that's not the only place, obviously, that your customer data can be activated, and Brandon will talk a little bit about that as we go. Also, Wikipedia, if you look up octopi, they have the biggest brain-to-mass ratio. So we liked that, too, as we thought about our branding. Because I love mayonnaise, my ratio is quickly flipping the opposite way. Today we're going to talk about a lot of buzzwords here because it's a big presentation and buzzwords are important. Optimizing enterprise value of your digital marketing budgets by activating advanced customer measurement capabilities. What does that all mean? Optimizing, it just means you're getting your customer data and your analytics in a place where it can continuously be used. It's not getting into a place where you do a one-time measurement study and some really interesting insights and then it sits on a shelf for a couple of years. Enterprise value, online, offline, acquisition, lead nurturing cycle, lifetime value, whatever vertical or industry that you're in, is understanding that full enterprise value of your digital media investments. Digital marketing, that could be a whole presentation. We're not going to go through that, but obviously it's getting more complex as users' journeys through digital touch multiple different marketing channels and device types on the path to interacting with your brands. And activating, another good buzzword here. What is activating? At Ovative, we talk about analyzing plus doing. So it's not just the analytics, it's the doing from the analytics and the things you're learning from that. And what is advanced customer measurement capabilities? From the marketing side, that's the easy stuff that Brandon's team and a lot of you guys work on, which he'll walk through.
It's very easy, right? This customer data world, this sort of theme of this conference, someone was saying before in prior sessions. When we think about advanced measurement capabilities and customer data-driven capabilities in particular, we like to break it down into these 4 different buckets here. So I think, again, buzzwords that you've seen before: online to offline, full media mix modeling, multi-touch attribution, customer lifecycle. We're going to dig in most deeply on online to offline today. Which we sort of define and we think about here is, simply put, what is the online impact on offline? This could be store sales, this could be offline metrics. Some of these other ones, some of these other buzzwords around full media mix. So more regression-based modeling, sometimes customer level as well, to look at the full media mix budget overall and shift your more macro decision-making, multi-touch attribution, stitching together the customer level or cookie level, primarily through digital, although expanding beyond that, like things like TB attribution and other ways of manufacturing that customer level to understand that path to purchase. Customer lifecycle management, being able to look beyond just the sale or just the lead and really understand what's happening thereafter at things like lifetime value or new versus existing customers and so forth to optimize and make decisions on. All of these are super important. As I said, we're going to focus on online to offline today and that journey of leveraging customer data to do so. But because they're so related, a lot of times or you'll hear themes that really apply towards all of these as we go through the journey today. So why are we even talking to you about this? So I think we described a little bit sort of what Ovative does, but really online to offline is a large part of what we do. We have a team in place that has been working in a variety of ways in this space for over a decade. We have done over 20 plus engagements over the past few years within the enterprise or customer measurement and online to offline space across a variety of different industries. And I'd say also most enabling to all of this is the technologies that we look at. So obviously all of what you need in order to capture data and drive customer data and measurement capabilities forward is technology to capture that data and then activate and use it to either buy your marketing differently or maybe change your site experience. And we spend a lot of time digging in and vetting these spaces as well. So this is sort of the foundation to establish at least some level of credibility before we dig into this of what we're going to talk about today. So why is it important? There's probably a million stats that you guys can look up. You don't need to take a picture of this slide like we're seeing in prior sessions because you can very easily Google some of these. But 87% of shoppers gather information before they transact offline. 64 cents of every dollar is spent in physical stores is influenced by digital interaction. 70% of marketing executives said they would spend more on mobile, digital, and social if they understood the broader enterprise impact. These are really big numbers, so this is not an exercise or an academic one of just saying, how do we connect customer data together to do something that, again, is not going to drive value? It's focusing where the value is. That is really what we're focusing on unlocking here. Another way to look at this, so US advertising media market sales. Bottom line here, this is not going to be new news to most of you. Internet advertising is growing fast, and by 2019, don't look at the orange there because that's a mistake that we couldn't take back in time. By 2019, internet advertising will be outpacing television and is already obviously dwarfing all other channels. What does this mean? More scrutiny on it for your organizations, more questions around what value is it driving, better measurement is needed in order to really understand how you can explain what it's doing, and certainly connecting it to things beyond just digital impact is going to be not just a nice to have, but essential.
At one time, online to offline was considered the Holy Grail. We actually were at a breakfast with a CMO of a client of ours, and he said, that's the Holy Grail. If I had that, I would know exactly how much I should be spending in digital and how to spend it. Fortunately, over the past couple of years, thanks to Brandon's team, we've been able to bring that capability to life for his organization. And near the end of the presentation, we'll go through an actual case study of how we analyzed that data and then how we activated it in the digital space. Can't help ourselves. Any Monty Python and the Holy Grail fans in the audience? All right, that's for you. Don't be like the black. Thank you. Thank you. Don't be like the Black Knight who just refuses to recognize the disadvantage that he is in by not activating his online to offline data. Okay. So why it's important, Brandon's been alluding to that. There's some big stats. So media companies and technologies get it more than anybody because they realize people like Google. Anne is from Google. So we're going to tone down our knocks on Google through the rest of the presentation. Yes, you're welcome. But Google gets it, right? So many of you might already have this type of Google. Google's allowing people to track when somebody clicks through on an ad from a search engine and see kind of where they go and if they show up at a physical place of location. So we have a retailer that we've been leveraging this data, and in the apparel side of their business, we're looking at what's the return on ad spend of the apparel spend for this retailer, and it's about a 4.5 return on ad spend, not too bad. as we've ingested some of the data we've gotten from Google in terms of how many people also go to a physical location and transact, and we look at that full enterprise value of that spend on Google, that number goes up to 6.3%, which is, that's interesting, that we're missing out on about 50% of the value, and so we're not spending accordingly. But where it gets really interesting is you break that down by category, and yes, this is a gun safe, and there's no guns on premise here. Don't get me started on gun control, and I don't have my conceal and carry. But categories like this start out in just the online-only view, having a 6.5% return on ad spend, so a little bit better than the apparel. But because it's such a highly researched purchase, once we added in the data from Google that showed how many people went to the store to buy this item, the return on ad spend went up dramatically. And so we've been in this world of taking the budgets and optimizing them with only the online view in mind. And as we have a glimpse into what the enterprise view is, it dramatically changes how we would spend our clients' money. More detail, it gets down into category level. So it's great. We're very thankful for media companies like Google that accelerate this because, as Brandon mentioned, we're passionate about this topic. But what's the problem? No offense. It's a point solution that only works, it's only data for Google. So we don't have it for Bing, we don't have it for our display channels, we don't have it for our social channels, we don't have it for our affiliate channels. And besides, it's Google, and Google wins when we spend more money. So I don't always trust the point solutions as much as if I had my own customer data to look at. So if I had a common measurement framework where I could start to look across channels, now all of a sudden I can start to mix my budgets across channels. And while the data is really nice for our search channel, it doesn't work to mix across digital channels. So some key questions in this whole topic the executives are asking, it's new, right? So why is online to offline measurement important? What is it? How do I know I can trust it? How much is it going to cost? I've got 1,000 other priorities across the enterprise. Why is this the one that's so important? So as Brandon walks through the how do we approach this at enterprise, at clients, he'll answer some of those questions. On the marketing side, for the marketers in the room, these are the questions that you guys are probably asking yourselves or that CMOs are asking you. Am I spending enough on digital channels? Is it mixed properly across the channels? As we spend in digital channels and ultimately our consumers are showing up on a digital property, whether that's a mobile device or the desktop, what types of experiences on those devices are pushing people to physical locations or creating the most value for me as the enterprise? If I had a measurement system and I could test into that, that would be highly valuable. And then with this new data, what new processes and technologies and different people and skill sets am I going to need to wield this new data asset as it powers my digital marketing? So Brandon's going to walk us through the journey of where do you start and how do you go about building this solution? Nice handoff.
That was nice. Pass the baton. So we've talked about why it's important. We've talked about some of the questions that are going to be asked that an online to offline capability or customer data measurement more broadly can answer. But how do you do it? As Steve said, that's what we want to talk about now. We want to talk through how we define it at Ovative Group. You can define it in different ways, I'm sure, but a structured path of going through an online to offline capability development and activation of those insights. So we break it down to these 3 phases: create the plan, build the solution, activate the insights. Some folks in the audience that have worked with us before are familiar with how we think. As Steve alluded to earlier, this probably will take a little bit longer than 20 minutes to actually do in the real world, and may actually take longer for me to talk about it because I can be a little bit wordy, as you guys are probably already seeing here. But I'll do my best to keep it efficient.
I'll keep you moving along.
Thank you. Create the plan. So, as many of you may expect, starting with creating the plan is defining the business objectives. So, Ovative Group, above all else, I would say, is passionate about making sure that we're driving alignment on what your online to offline capability is going to achieve, and continuing to drive that throughout the entire journey that we're going to go through. Without this alignment, as sort of obvious as it sounds, we've seen capabilities or attempted capabilities fail most of the time. because you need that inclusiveness and you need that alignment in order to make things move forward. So how do we think about that to make sure we're exhaustive and go as detailed as possible early on? We think about objectives on 3 levels. The objective itself, the overarching business objective, so where should we focus that the business is already really focused on and aligning with that. The use case, what should we do? What should we be focusing on there? And then the tactic itself, how should we actually be doing it? So a good example here is for an education client that we work with. They had an overarching business objective of reducing their reliance on buying paid leads. The use case that we went through, so what should we do, was we need to shift our marketing optimization focus to offset the loss of applications that they're going to get by reducing their focus on buying leads. What was the tactic that we can do to make that happen? We could optimize our display MBA campaigns to target those sites that were overlapping most with their pay-per-lead sources. There are many examples, obviously, that we can go through on the tactical level and really any one of these, but you can see how, even at this stage, before we've looked at any data, before we even made the capability or any connections of data in any way, we're starting to get down to a tactical level that is really going to drive our path forward. So where does that go to? Goes to identifying the data and technology gaps based on these use cases and tactics that we've identified. So we know what we want to accomplish. What do we have to accomplish it? This early on in the process, it really becomes an exercise of understanding what exists today so that we can understand what we can accomplish as early on as possible, both from a capability development standpoint as well as this activation, this doing, versus those things that we're going to have to roadmap and look a little bit longer term because you need a new technology integration or you need to append with third-party data. Some examples here, and again, sort of a summary level outcome of what existing data systems they have and what they can accomplish is a common unique ID. So do they have a common customer ID that they can use to connect from online to offline, very simply put? Impression-based media. So a big question, obviously, for marketers is there's a lot of hype around display impressions and the value that they're not just driving online, but certainly offline or in store for retailers or offline for those channels that have interactions offline. It's thinking about this way and boiling down and focusing on this use cases, bringing it together, that allows us to think about where are we going to go and what those gaps are. They're going to make a big difference.
And just to interject, it's so important to bring partners along through the journey. So watching Brandon's team go into an organization and go through a very formal process of stakeholder interviews so that you get down to the level of, by the time the marketer that gets a new report, and rather than saying, hey, now go do something with it, that marketer's been involved in the process to say, what is the type of data that I consume, and how do the mechanics of my channel actually operate, and what is that type of ID that works in my channel so that you can give the data to my channel so that I can now activate and optimize against this new data.
Because it is new, it takes a few times to understand and really sort of wrap your head around, and it's a good segue into proving the value of it so they can actually see it firsthand as soon as possible. And we look at this as proving the business case. Part of this planning process, I think typically most people don't necessarily think they're going to build out a prototype or prototype the capability, which we always recommend doing. So based on the prior sort of chart that you saw around what do they have, what can we use right now to build a prototype online to offline data set before we've even said what your roadmap is or what your plan is, to help them prove the business case around what the financial benefits or opportunity this can drive. So this is an example of a summary of an analysis that we did with a retail client where we were able to use this prototype online to offline capability to demonstrate that their websites or visits to their websites are driving incremental sales during the week of the browse and the week following the browse. Summary level, was this transforming their organization? Was it allowing them to activate right away? No. But was it turning their heads and getting the C-level and executive team to say, there's something here and I want to invest in it and see where it goes? Absolutely. They got very excited and we were able to continue to move forward. Finally, create the plan. Build the roadmap. So as boring as it sounds, the roadmap word overall is a sort of a boring concept, I admit, but it is super critical to success. And going back to Steve's comment, continuing to have a document and a set of sort of defined, aligned understanding of what is going to allow you to continue to align around these objectives and this roadmap over the longer term. A key to that is not just understanding over the next couple of years, let's say, what use cases and what technology and what capabilities you need early on, but also over the longer term, but especially for those more tactical first 3 to 6 months, is getting tactical, building your project plan. What are you actually going to accomplish in those first 3 to 6 months, and hold these owners and these stakeholders accountable for doing it is critical, because that longer-term roadmap is obviously going to evolve. So keys to success, we've talked about a number of these. Data collection takes forever, so there are many folks in the room that I'm sure are not unfamiliar with working with CRM teams or IT teams, the data owners, if you will, the data experts. They're already tapped. They're already pulled in a lot of different directions, so the more you can be as detail-oriented with the data request and what you specifically need as early on in the process as possible is going to lead to more success and, frankly, upset fewer people, which, when you're dealing with something that is going to create tension, the more people you have on your side, the better. Taking partners along for the journey. So Steve, again, alluded to this earlier. If your partners and the people you're working with don't understand what you're doing and why, they're never going to fully adopt it. So being as inclusive as possible is super important. There was one client that we worked with that had, within their marketing organization, had their broadcast media team, their direct marketing team, and their digital marketing team were 3 separate teams in their marketing organization. And one of them was sort of our quote-unquote primary client. We were very intentional because we had learned the hard way. They were operating as silos, frankly. We were not going to do that. We were going to bring them together and help make sure that we are collecting the use cases and their objectives from all of them, and that they are along for the road, or along for the ride, so that in the end, when it comes time to actually applying this stuff, which we're going to get into in a few minutes, they were ready to do so. Finally, work on your short and end game. So we talked about this. Focus on those use cases that you can drive towards now with an eye towards the future. Don't try and tackle them all at one time, because then you end up trying to build this big behemoth thing, and then you never actually end up getting anywhere, because you need to continually fund and resource towards something that really should be driving incremental ROI the entire time. You see that starting even with the prototyping concept, where, again, before we've even said what you should do, we're starting to make connections, starting to do analysis. So you can almost think about the analysis that we did as sort of the ROI early on, showing those tangible benefits as early on in the process as possible. Okay.
Time check, Brandon. Time check.
Time check? Keep going.
Time check.
Okay. Build the solution. So we have a plan. We have a prototype. Let's build it. Build a full functioning solution. So in the prototyping phase, we started to understand what systems, what data exists. This visual is showing how we're going to go a little bit further. It's very high level, obviously, but the concept still applies, where you have the various systems and types of data that are there. How are they all flowing together, and how we're going to bring them together to create this online to offline data set that will lead towards activation. This is also the time in the process where what gaps have we identified that require third-party integrations, technology integration. So for example, in the online to offline space, a common integration will be with a data onboarder like LiveRamp that can help you onboard offline data and find their cookie versions of themselves online for attribution measurement and stitching that in. These offline for direct mail, let's say, if you want to onboard direct mail data and find them and stitch them into the path, use a data onboarder. Similarly, if you want to target these people for, if you're a healthcare insurance company and you want to target those people that are going after Medicare products, how do you onboard those people that you know about and find them online and target them and use this capability? Something that we'll commonly explore with our clients. Then it's about building the data foundation. So because of the time check, thank you, Steve, as well as we're getting a little bit into the weeds here, basically the theme here is, this is where at Ovative, at least, we call the magic men go to work. They're taking, our data engineers, also the magic men, they're taking this sort of unstructured data or integrated data that has not really been organized that well and building the architecture and really taking it down to a level where we know what tables need to exist to drive value, to drive activation, not just for reporting at the executive level, but or for marketing teams, but also use it even for programmatic buying for marketing or personalization on site. So automation that is needed at a level that requires a pretty sophisticated thinking around what that solution architecture should look like. Design and produce iteration 1 of reporting. So we have a sample here, but this is the exciting part. This is where you get to start talking to your audiences around what is possible, what do they need with these new metrics, and build out for those audience. So whether it's the executive team, your marketing team, your finance team, your promo team, there are many more depending on what organization or what vertical or industry you're in. This is one simple example, again, going back to an education client where by state, where they have many different schools in each state, the cost per lead efficiency story here, if you look at these boxes, is very different when you're looking at the efficiency when just looking at the lead versus actual enrollment and what actions you can take. This drove, even at this level, very different decision-making in terms of how they were allocating their budget by state, which is how or by school, excuse me, which is how their campaigns were structured, and something that we sort of built upon from there. Again, this is one simple example. The key here is constant iteration, right? We're continuing to move here. We're starting simple, but as the organization evolves with you in step, you're getting more and more mature with the reporting, with the activation, and so forth. Finally, roadshow. So it may be surprising given that we're at a MinneAnalytics or analytics-driven conference, but when I look at all of you, I think I see a bunch of salespeople. I was supposed to get a laugh. And that's because when it comes to implementing and building new transformative capabilities and these types of initiatives, you got to sell it. We can't just be sort of the analysts in the background or the technical folks in the background. You need to push it forward. A common example at a retail client or a multi-channel retailer is they have a .com business and a store business operating separately. Now you're building a capability that's allowing them to invest in marketing that stretches across both these. So something that creates tension, but you need to be the driver, the hero that's really willing to stick it out and keep pushing it forward. Keys to success, we've talked about many of these, and we want to leave 15 minutes, okay? So we want to leave some time for questions, and we want to get to the magic here that Steve's going to walk through. Aligning is key. Keep aligning all the way through. You've heard this theme all throughout, and it will continue to be important as we move into activation. Respect what change takes, but don't be afraid of it. I think a lot of people end up having something great here with something like online to offline and start the selling process. And because it's new to people, they assume that their internal clients, if you will, they're like, oh, that must be wrong, or that's intimidating to me. You got to keep pushing past that because that's where the fun happens, right? That's where you can really keep transforming an organization when you feel that tension. And then never stop educating. Continuously be improving on how you can get people to understand what metrics they need to use, how they should use it, and why they're using it is a necessary part of all of it, which is it gets to be more fun as you get into it there.
And it's new information. People aren't going to get it the first time. I mean, just know going in when you first time you present this new information, they're just not going to understand it, and it just takes that educational process. 10 years ago, when we first started presenting some of this data to the president of Target.com, he threw the presentation back at us and said, I don't get it, and it's not intuitive. You got to make it more understandable. The guy was a total jerk, but he was right. Is Dale Nitschke. He's in the room. He's our boss now. He leads Ovative Group, and we built a business around this whole concept. But you just got to know it's new, so it's not intuitive, and that roadshow piece is so important. Even though the roadshow visual, I think, had us roadshowing in Europe, which we don't have a presence there. It's just an image we needed.
Could do that, though.
We could.
Yeah. We're
on our way. All right, so how do you activate the insights? So that CMO who said, that's the Holy Grail. If I had that data, I'd know exactly what to do with it. This is the company. So it's a $15 billion retailer. They did not sell online. Yes, there's still $15 billion retailers out there that do not sell online. Back in mid-August, we got every agency's dream. The client called us up and said, hey, we found some more budget. Like, when does that happen? We got $100,000, and we want you to spend it in paid search to support our back-to-school and back-to-college campaigns. Brandon reminded me I should probably define back-to-school and back-to-college, but I think many of you have children, and you know that. Brandon does not have children, so he often kind of asks questions like that.
My dog is quite human-like, though. So.
Yeah. So the goal was spend it against these two categories. Because we don't sell online, the goal is get as many people into our stores as you possibly can. Fortunately, Brandon's team had walked through the journey that he just walked you through, and we had the solution stood up. So we didn't panic. We said, we can do this. We can put together a really effective plan. The goal was we need a plan tomorrow, and then the media's got to start in 2 days. Panicked a little bit on that, but we have an amazing team that worked with Brandon's team to put together the plan. So our first question was, how much do we spend against back to college or back to school? And we needed to answer that. What types of keywords they wanted it spent in search? What types of keywords are going to be the most effective at getting people into the stores? And then we're going to drive people to the website, which doesn't sell. So where should we land them, and what pages are going to be most effective at converting somebody into the store? So as Brandon alluded to, we got out our kind of decision framework of the objectives and the tactics and the goals. The merchandise categories were already set for us. This money was going to be spent in digital. Paid search was the channel. So we started to think through what is the experience we're going to land somebody on, and then what types of keywords within these categories are we going to spend that against.
And this is a good example of where reflection on, early on in the plan phase, we defined what those objectives are, what those use cases, what those tactics are. But now we have data in our hands, right? We have the full capability that Steve's team does an amazing job of sort of consuming that, looking back at what was sort of established earlier on. How do we refine that now with more information, which is an important part of the process?
And the beauty of what we have going on at our company is our team that was supposed to plan this stood up, took 15 steps over to their counterparts on Brandon's team, and they sat down together and figured this out. As Brandon mentioned, walking into a lot of big organizations, like the organizations many of you work at, we walk in and go through these processes, and we're introducing people for the first time that have worked at the same company for over a decade. Get to know your counterparts in analytics and media. It's really important. So where did we start? We started with where's the user demand. So this data is available to anybody, thanks to Google. And we did some research trends, and it showed that back to college had more activity where people were searching online than back to school. Brandon, that's because parents do not go and search for Crayola markers and crayons. It's more of a staple item. They'll look in a print circular for that. So that wasn't surprising. But what was super helpful is that Brandon's team had already built out the capability where we had insights by category of people getting to this client's website and which categories had the greatest effect on converting people into a store buyer. So between these two pieces of data, we set the allocation of that $100,000, 75% to back to college and 25% to back to school. The client pushed back on that and said, actually, the rest of our media, the mix is quite opposite, so could you guys do the opposite? And we held our ground and said, hey, let us walk you through this information and why we came up with that. And that convinced them, and we stuck with the plan, which is good. Then it was, where are we going to land these people? So they had multiple experiences out there that we could land on. And they were starting to, as Brandon mentioned, these early prototypes are really important. As we rolled out those prototypes, even the creative folks in the room light bulbs started going on. They said, so you could actually tell us if we created two different creative experiences, which one's most effective at getting consumers into our stores. And no offense to any creatives out there, but if creative people are starting to ask those questions, you're educating properly. Back to school, same thing. We designed a landing page test. The results, unfortunately, we don't have results, but this is the framework we would put them in. I'm just kidding. So the spend, 75, 25% mix. Again, we had a 2-day turnaround. The team did an extraordinary job working together, launching the campaigns. The early metrics had us a little nervous. So back to college was not getting the click-through rate that back to school was. The costs were higher on the back to college campaigns than the back to school campaigns. And here we had allocated 75% of the budget to back to college. The client started calling us saying, see, I told you so. We should have mixed it differently, and told us to remix the rest of the campaign. We tried to say, hey, hold on a second. Remember the data we analyzed. Trust us. We really strongly feel that back to college is going to give you the greatest return on your ad spend. Any agency folks in the room know that oftentimes those conversations don't go the way you want. And so the client won out because the client's always right.
Steve is being humble about that conversation. It was way angrier and more tense than that. I was listening outside.
Yeah. A couple times walked away, tail tucked between my legs. So we reallocated the spend mix. At the end of the day, as the results came in, the data proved out right. It wasn't us. The data just was very clear that the traffic going to a back to college experience was going to convert people higher to in-store. A lot of that was intuitive. Like I said, you don't have to be Brandon without a kid and only a dog to know that people aren't researching crayons to go to the store. They're researching dorm furniture and things like that. Yeah, okay, yeah, good point. The key point here, traditional digital metrics, like this client was used to making all their decisions from a digital standpoint, don't correlate ultimately to the metric they were trying to drive, which was in-store sales. Results by landing page. So again, this proved out really important. The results were wildly different. I think most of us thought that the weekly ad is a really effective tool at engaging people and getting them into the store. And in this case, when we kind of split the traffic, coupons, no surprise, had a really big impact. If you take anything away from this conference, coupons work. I'm just kidding. And then this really expensive back-to-college experience that they had built, they were really interested because they had spent a lot of money from agencies, and they had spent a lot of time developing this experience, and there was a lot of debate on, is that worth it? We were surprised how well that did, but it actually did really well.
And these results were actually what excited me most, because it was, while obviously the media sort of optimization to store is huge and probably more talked about, the landing page optimization at an enterprise level and leveraging that customer data connection to do so is something that we're focusing on more and more as a company, because there's just so much untapped value there, and small percentage increases in conversion, it's obvious, especially to store when you have that visibility into it, can drive even greater value than tweaking or even significant changes to your media optimization or the traffic quality, if you will. So both of those together and looking at those and valuing that is definitely an important part to the equation.
So these types of results, even though it was one campaign, really turned the light on for a lot of people at this client. And we started to then look across search and display and other channels and start to compare, and that really significantly changed the way that we were spending their digital media budgets on their behalf. The learnings, we kind of went through these. So you're going to have evolving KPIs. Organizations are pretty set in their ways on what are the KPIs that drive my business, and as you expand to enterprise KPIs, that's new. And a lot of you live in a world of comping to last week or comping to last month or last year, and now you have different metrics and you don't necessarily have the comps. And so it's a journey to go through from an organization. Landing pages, super important in driving enterprise results, touched on that. And then there's going to be variances by category or the products that your companies sell. And you need to understand which ones your consumers are most interacting with your brand from a digital standpoint to understand the enterprise impact of your investments in digital. Keys to success, hit on a lot of these. You're going to have to make some trade-offs on KPIs. So organizations that are very siloed, now all of a sudden you've got a group of people that are gold, their bonuses are dependent on e-commerce or digital metrics. And you've got people where offline metrics are their goal and their incentives are structured upon. And now you have this digital thing that drives both. But at a lot of organizations, the digital budget lives in one of those pyramids. And so how do you get through that, that conflict that might arise? Get wins early. Brandon mentioned that. That'll get adoption. And this capability, it doesn't replace all the other tools you have out there. It's complementary. It's another analysis in the mix that can validate some of your other data sources, but it doesn't completely replace every other data source you have. Closing remarks.
So we have a few. Why don't we put them up there? You want to run it all the way through?
Sure.
So we'll just leave those up there because we only have 5 minutes left and want to see if there are questions. I think the major takeaway here, I would say, is maybe more on the right side, where we went through some level of detail here. For some of you, it may seem like overly detailed, so apologies for that. But there's a lot more to learn, I promise. And we've actually written a white paper on this very topic. So I believe there are cards that have been passed out, or if they're not, you can go to Ovative Group or Ovative.com/O2O to download it yourself, or just maybe email one of us and we can send it to you. If you'd like to learn more and just dig into this and really see some of the best practices and experiences that we've had directly with clients. With that, any questions?
Any questions for Brandon?
Or Steve?
Hey, that was great. What match table did you use to connect in-store to into paid search on the category level? That's what interests me.
So prototyping-wise, we leveraged their web analytics technology, and Stitch. They were already tracking or housing. Fortunately, in that example, I believe the anonymized PII associated with purchasers as well as email IDs, or people that have downloaded or receiving an email, and then use that to connect to sort of their CRM data in store.
This is a really important question. So Brandon's team had built the web analytics to in-store POS system integration. So it had I know somebody's at our site, and now I know what they bought in store. From a search perspective, our media team sat down with Brandon's team and said, hey, how do we need to design the structure of our search account, and what are all the appropriate tracking that is like the non-sexy, non-fun piece, but how do I make sure that all of that is structured in a way so that by the time it gets into the web analytics environment, we have that categorical structure to then map to the store's category structure.
And not just from a reporting standpoint, but also to go down to a level, you were saying category, even keyword level, to pipe into, let's say, a bid management tool for actual execution with it.
I had that similar question, but also have another question. So how do you validate your attribution modeling results? How do you know if it's working or not?
Great question. You'd be surprised how different people's point of views are on that, or maybe not, across organizations that we work with. Some are more comfortable with just managing to influence sales and looking at the sort of correlation, not causation, around what media channels are contributing and optimizing based on that. Others are more focused on incrementality, which actually at the last conference with MinneAnalytics, I spoke about incrementality a little bit, and that's certainly a place that we spend a lot of time thinking about. I'd say overall, measurement capabilities on their own and building this, to your point, is only giving you just answers, and insights around it. But then we have a test and learn approach that we like to go through. And similar, even the examples that Steve walked through around what worked, it was a test and learn approach where it said, okay, here's the hypothesis based on this data that we have. Whether it's geo-based or measured at the customer level with some sort of holdout, to use this data to see what happens when we're buying differently in these two different geographies or these two different customer types, and see what the incremental impact difference is.
You must be an executive. If you remember our question slide, one of the executive questions was, how can I trust this data? Essentially, that's what you're asking. How can I trust this? One of the follow-ups that we had was, this doesn't replace all your other measurement systems. At most of your enterprises, you are using some sort of a partner or a measurement system to do market testing and measure the impact on offline sales. That needs to validate the customer level online to offline data stitching that Brandon's team is putting together. And if through various testing methodologies those don't jive, then likely as an executive you're going to say, I don't trust it unless you can prove it's better than what I already have. One more question? Oh, sure.
So I was wondering how you actually look at national projections then.
By national projections, you mean?
So for CPG data, you're connecting it to a small group, right? And so how do you then project nationally?
Like extrapolate out, you're saying?
Yeah.
Got it, okay. So CPG is an interesting one where it's sort of a different beast in its own right? Because you don't have, well, for the most part, you don't really have a direct-to-consumer relationship. So that is, again, maybe a whole other sort of solution architecture conversation that maybe we should present on last time, now that you bring it up, or next time. As far as how to extrapolate out, there's, again, I think multiple points of view of comfort around what our clients are looking at. And what organizations have already adopted. We'll face some clients where they're just okay with linear extrapolation. And it's better than they had before, especially if you're just optimizing digital to digital, so it's apples to apples. It's a safer place where you can know that it's not exactly right and it's still an estimate, and just do that because linear, much like, let's say, a rules-based attribution as an example, is just easier to understand, which, going back to the theme of this presentation around get alignment, make sure they understand, is an important part to this. So you got to balance that. Sophistication often comes at the sacrifice of people just getting confused, which we don't want to have happen. In other cases, we've taken a variety of different approaches, including using their customer segmentation, the different types of their best customers, worst customers, how do they spend on average. Obviously, when you're looking at those customers that are identified, it's probably going to weight towards their better customers, so you need to account for that. Their average retail, average in-store retail or number of leads that they are contributing is going to be higher, so we need to account for that bias and normalize for it, so we'll use that and their averages there to do so. I'd say that's a common approach to doing it. And I'd say it's 50-50 or so because it's not like this is a totally new concept to clients where a lot of times they'll have some sort of approach that we'll start with and then evolve it from there. In other cases, it is, going back to even your question around how do you trust it, rolling up our sleeves side by side and building it together with them.
And this isn't a trick question, but at CPG, do you use Nielsen home scan panel data for different studies? Panel-based, right? About 125,000 households, roughly. Do you know how they extrapolate that audience?
Not to that granular. We use others as well.
Hardly anybody does, but to to Brandon's point, like a lot of times it's just a straight line extrapolation. Brandon's team gets in there and understands who is this panel that I can really measure, and did they over-index as a best customer? And as we extrapolate to the total, we'll discount the extrapolation values because we know the panel that we're looking at tends to be a better customer.
We'll leave it there, but thank you both so much, and please make sure that you grab your little card for the white paper.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.